Daniel awoke before the sun in Valle de Bravo. The lake was flat, the streets were stone and uneven. He counted his steps to the church. He joined, then stayed. He stacked chairs, he led prayer. He learned names, he read the handbook the elders gave him. It set out how a man becomes clergy. Not a slogan, not a shortcut. Steps, training, witness, laying on of hands. He kept records, pay stub, calendars, a file of letters on real letterhead with wet ink. 2 years of work, no gaps. 2 years in the same faith. He did hospital visits. He wrote short homilies in a notebook with a torn cover. The pages smelled like dust and oil from his hands. When the elders ordained him, the church bell sounded thin and high. He felt the weight of his hands. He did not cry. He exhaled and stared at the cracked plaster on the ceiling. A pastor from New Mexico called, a nonprofit parish with a tax letter framed behind glass. They needed a minister who speaks Spanish and English, full-time, paid, duties listed in plain words. The church filed the petition for an R1. They sent proof of money and mission. They sent copies of his ordination, membership, and the plan for his week. A site inspector came, walked the aisles, touched the pulpit, asked what Daniel did at 6 a.m. on Thursdays. Daniel showed the prayer rota. The inspector nodded and wrote something in a notebook with a black cover. Approval came in an email first, then a notice by mail. Daniel packed a single suitcase. He hugged his mother in the doorway and counted his steps back to the gate because he could not count the years he might be gone. In New Mexico, the wind cut his cheeks. The church smelled like old wood. He preached on Sundays. He met with families on weeknights in a room with a humming light. He kept his own log because he trusted paper. He sent money to Valle on the first of each month. The church filed the I-360 for him as a minister, a thicker packet, more exhibits. He signed where the pastor pointed, they mailed it, and prayed in silence. Case received. On the second notice, he saw the words priority date. He wrote the date on a sticky note and stuck it under a small cross on his desk. The visa bulletin went tight and gray. Unavailable. He did not say the word out loud. He kept working. People still came. The food pantry still ran. A boy needed shoes for school. A woman needed a ride to the clinic. A husband wanted someone to sit with him next to a bed and say nothing. Winter came, then left. The site inspector came again. The file grew heavy. He renewed his R1 and stayed within the lines. No skipping days, no side jobs, no loose ends. One Tuesday, the pastor slid an envelope across the table. Approved, he said. It did not mean finished. It meant he could wait with a number in his hand. He waited. He checked the bulletin each month and said nothing if moved or did not move. When the month finally turned and his date was current, they filed the I-485. He gave fingerprints. He sat for photos under a light, too bright for a small room. He went back to work. Work permits came. Then a letter for an interview. He ironed his shirt, brought a folder with tabs. The officer asked about duties, hours, pay. He answered. The officer looked down at a screen and then back up and said, "Welcome to the United States as a lawful permanent resident." The words felt both sharp and plain. He walked out into a parking lot full of dust and heat. He called his mother. He held the phone tightly and said only, "It worked." He waited the short time the law requires, then went to a recruiter. He laid the green card on the desk. The recruiter checked boxes on a screen. This path is not for tourists or wishes. The rules were clear. He signed, he trained, he kept his head shaved, his boots clean, his bunk tight. He did what he was told, and he did it well, because other people needed him to do it well. He learned the names of the men on his left and his right. He learned the weight of a ruck. He learned to sit with fear until it cooled. He kept a small prayer card in his wallet next to his new ID. He served, no headlines, no speeches. He met the standard, then met it again in the rain. The days stacked. The file grew again. DD 214 later with codes that mattered. Honorable. Back at the church, he wore a smaller uniform. He filed the N400. The pastor signed the N426 to certify his service. He sent copies of the orders, the discharge, the card. He checked the mail the same hour each day. The letter came for biometrics, then the letter for an interview. He studied the civics questions in the evening, names, dates, what the oaths ask of a person. He practiced answers while sweeping the hall. He did not try to make them pretty, he tried to make them true. On interview day, he took a number and sat under a television with no sound. When his name came, he stood. The officer was polite but careful with every word. The English test felt like his first sermon. Short questions, clear answers. He passed. The last letter named a date and a room that smelled like new paint. The flag stood at the front and the gold fringe. Families packed the rows. He took a seat near the exit, as he always had, and watched a boy with a paper flag stare at the seal on the wall. The officer read the oath. Daniel raised his right hand. The words felt heavy in his mouth, but they fit. He renounced and promised. He finished and lowered his hand. No band played, no lights flashed. He stood there with a small envelope and a certificate with his new name set in black type. He walked outside. The sun sat low over a wide lot. The wind moved dust. He looked at the paper, then folded it once and slid into the inside pocket of his coat. He called his mother. She answered on the second ring. He said, "Soy ciudadano," and heard the breath in her. He did not speak for a long time. Neither did she. That night he sat at his desk. The sticky note with the old priority date had gone pale in the edges. He pulled it free and tucked it behind the certificate. He wrote one more line in his notebook. Today I was sworn in. He closed the book. He sat in a drawer. He turned off the light. The church was quiet. The building held its shape in the dark, the way buildings do when people have made promises in them. He locked the door and stepped out in the cold.